Have you ever opened your door to someone, expecting nothing more than an ordinary afternoon, only to find that the hours ahead would shift something fundamental in how you see yourself and those around you? That's precisely what happened the day I welcomed one of my students into my sanctuary. What began as a straightforward tutoring session unfolded into an afternoon brimming with quiet laughter and unexpected wisdom that neither of us saw coming. The sunlight was generous, the blossoms were at their peak, and I had no idea that Daniel, my thoughtful and earnest student, would leave an imprint on me that I never anticipated. Hold on just a moment before we continue. If this story is touching something in you, please take a second to like this video and subscribe. It genuinely makes a difference and helps me bring you more stories like this one. I also want to hear from you. Write in the comments, where are you right now? Are you tucked away in a peaceful village where stars fill the sky, or surrounded by the hum and glow of a city that never sleeps? I've always held the conviction that teaching transcends the mere transfer of knowledge. It's fundamentally about human connection. So when Daniel asked if he could come to my home for a study session, I agreed without hesitation. He was courteous, hungry to learn, and somehow managed to make physics, a subject I normally find straightforward, feel like a genuine exploration of ideas. I remember that morning with clarity that still surprises me. The garden was exploding with life, clematis winding along the fence, peonies bowing under their own weight in shades of coral and cream, and sunlight filtering through the maple tree onto the flagstone path. I spent the first several minutes arranging the refreshments, placing butter cookies on a plate despite knowing he would likely polish them off in moments. Daniel arrived just as I was coaxing a particularly rebellious vine back onto its trellis. There was always something understated about his presence, not showy, but somehow compelling. He smiled when he caught sight of me, a touch bashful but genuinely warm. I noticed how he paused at the garden's edge, almost drinking everything in at once. "I've never seen your garden like this," he said, looking around with genuine wonder. "It's remarkable." "Thank you," I replied, feeling an unexpected flutter in my chest that I swiftly tried to dismiss. "Nothing elaborate, but it's my little corner of the world." We settled at the weathered bistro table near the koi pond. I poured jasmine tea, and for a while we simply watched the fish glide through the water and listened to the occasional drone of bumblebees moving from bloom to bloom. It was the kind of stillness that made time feel suspended, almost sacred. When we finally opened the textbooks, I anticipated the familiar tension of a tutoring session, the pressure of formulas, my attempts to explain concepts clearly. But instead, our conversation quickly meandered. We talked about his upcoming projects, then about his childhood, the small frustrations of his daily life, and somehow found ourselves sharing stories about our families. I discovered myself laughing more than I had anticipated, and I noticed him doing the same, his eyes lighting up in that sincere way that makes you feel genuinely witnessed. At one point, he leaned across to indicate a challenging problem in my notes, and our hands touched briefly, almost by accident. It was fleeting, nearly imperceptible, yet sufficient to make my heart stumble. I told myself it was simply the dynamic between teacher and student, nothing more, but the warmth persisted. The sun climbed higher in the sky, and we took a wander through the garden. Daniel stopped at the herb bed, running his fingers gently across the rosemary and lavender I'd been cultivating for months. "You grow all of this yourself?" he asked, genuinely impressed. I nodded, smiling at his curiosity. "Gardening teaches you patience. Everything requires attention, and sometimes you have to step back and let nature follow its own rhythm." He considered this thoughtfully. I could stand to learn from that. Patience, I mean. There was a quiet intimacy in that moment, the kind that doesn't demand words. We stood side by side, letting the sun warm our shoulders, and I became aware of how unusual it felt to be this at ease with a student. Usually the boundaries are crystal clear, but today the line seemed softer, more human. We returned to the table for further study, though the rhythm had shifted. There was a shared understanding now, a subtle current running between us that made even the numbers and equations feel lighter, almost playful. We joked about how physics could be like life, sometimes bewildering, sometimes maddening, but ultimately satisfying if you approached it with patience and curiosity. By the time Daniel departed, the garden was bathed in late afternoon gold. He thanked me sincerely, and I noticed how he lingered near the gate, not quite ready to leave. I waved goodbye, experiencing a curious blend of satisfaction and melancholy. That day had transcended a study session. It had been a quiet revelation about the pleasure of connection, the magic of unexpected intimacy, and the simple beauty of sharing space with someone who genuinely notices. As I closed the gate behind him, I realized I would carry that afternoon with me for a long while. This wasn't about romance or anything inappropriate. It was about discovering that even within ordinary routines, life can astonish you, instruct you, and help you see people and yourself differently. I found myself gazing back at the garden, the sun melting into soft amber light, reflecting on how sometimes the most profound lessons emerge from the smallest gestures, the unplanned conversations, and the moments where we permit ourselves to be genuinely present. And so that day concluded, rich with small, unexpected lessons, laughter, and connection. A reminder that life occasionally presents experiences we never anticipated, and all we can do is embrace them with open hearts. The following week, I discovered myself thinking about Daniel more often than made logical sense. It wasn't anything I could articulate easily. It wasn't romantic in the way stories typically frame such connections, but there was an undeniable warmth whenever I remembered how he had listened, how he had laughed, how he had noticed the tiniest details in my garden. That Tuesday afternoon he appeared again, punctual as always, with a shy smile and a leather-bound journal under his arm. "Hello, Eleanor," he said, his voice carrying that gentle sincerity I'd come to treasure. "Thank you for having me back." "Of course," I replied, attempting to sound casual, though my chest felt oddly light. "I thought we might work near the pond today, get some fresh air while we tackle those problems you were wrestling with." He followed me along the flagstone path, glancing at the flowers as though seeing them for the first time. I noticed his fingers brushing lightly against petals and leaves almost reverently, and part of me wondered how often he permitted himself to slow down and appreciate small wonders. There was something unexpectedly human about watching someone experience your world with curiosity rather than judgment. We arranged our books on the table again, but before we could begin, Daniel surprised me. "I brought something," he said, reaching into his messenger bag. He pulled out a small notebook. "You mentioned once that you enjoyed nature writing. I thought perhaps you'd like to see what I attempted." I blinked, genuinely surprised. He handed the notebook to me, and as I flipped through the pages, I could see the care he had invested in every observation, the way he had described the pond's surface, the shadows cast by the maple, the particular quality of morning light on the peonies. He had captured them with a precision and sensitivity that made me feel almost seen, as though the garden itself had whispered its secrets to him, and he had listened. "These are beautiful," I said, genuinely moved. "You've captured the atmosphere perfectly, the way the light moves through the trees." He looked at me, a little self-conscious, then shrugged. I just tried to pay attention to what felt significant. It struck me then how rare it is to encounter someone who truly observes, rather than merely looks. We spent the next hour discussing literature, perception, and the art of noticing details in life we so often overlook. Our conversation flowed effortlessly, and I found myself sharing stories from my own younger years, things I had never revealed to students before. Daniel listened without interrupting, without judgment, just genuine interest, and it made me feel lighter, freer, more fully myself. After a while, the sunlight shifted, casting long golden ribbons across the garden. I suggested we wander through the herb patch. Daniel's eyes brightened when he saw the basil and thyme, and he crouched down to examine the soil, asking about planting techniques and watering schedules. His curiosity was infectious, and I felt a sense of pride I hadn't experienced in some time, not just in the garden, but in watching someone genuinely engage with it. "You really love this place, don't you?" he asked softly as we walked back toward the pond. "I do," I said, smiling. "It's my sanctuary, a space where I can breathe and think." He nodded thoughtfully. "I've never been somewhere that feels so alive." For a moment, we simply stood there, the gentle breeze rustling the leaves, the koi gliding through their pond in the late afternoon sun, and I realized that we had established a rhythm between us. There was respect, certainly, but also something quietly intimate in the way we moved through the garden, spoke, and shared space. It wasn't romantic in the conventional sense, but there was a deep unspoken connection, a meeting of minds and hearts. When we returned to the table, Daniel asked if he could help with a small project I'd been postponing, arranging some new container plants along the terrace. We worked together, laughing when we scattered soil on the stones or when a stubborn pot refused to sit straight. There was a playfulness between us that didn't exist during standard tutoring sessions. And yet beneath it, I could feel something more profound, an understanding, a trust, and an ease that made every shared task feel meaningful. Later, as the sun began its descent, we sat together with our tea, the sky painted in swirls of coral and violet. Daniel leaned back in his chair gazing at the garden, and for a moment the silence wasn't awkward. It was comforting. "You know," he said quietly, I didn't expect today to be like this. I thought we'd just study, maybe chat a little, but this has been different. In a good way. I smiled, feeling warmth spread through me. I know exactly what you mean. I think sometimes we underestimate what it means to share space with someone. Really share it. Not just physically, but mentally, emotionally. We remained there for a while longer, letting the garden settle into evening calm. Fireflies began to appear, their tiny lights flickering above the pond, and the scent of night, blooming jasmine drifted softly through the air. I realized that this day, like the last, wasn't about studying or teaching. It was about learning from each other, about noticing small joys, about seeing beauty in unexpected places and moments. As Daniel left that evening, he paused at the gate, smiling that quiet, sincere smile that made me feel simultaneously protective and inspired. "Thank you for today, Eleanor," he said. "I really appreciate it." "Anytime, Daniel," I replied, watching him walk down the path. "You're always welcome here." Once more, I closed the gate behind him, the garden now wrapped in twilight. I leaned against it for a moment, reflecting on how much richer life had felt over these past afternoons. There was a lesson in all of this, I realized, not in physics, not in literature, but in the way we allow ourselves to notice, to share, and to connect. Unexpected experiences can teach us more than any curriculum ever could if we simply let them. And in that stillness, I understood that these visits weren't merely about tutoring. They were a gentle reminder that even within routine, within ordinary days, there's space for growth, for laughter, and for the kind of human connection that lingers long after the moment has passed. The following Saturday, I found myself tending the garden earlier than usual. I couldn't explain why. Perhaps it was anticipation, or maybe the echo of Daniel's laughter from our last session still resonated in my mind. The peonies were blooming more fully now, the clematis climbing higher, and the air smelled of fresh earth and warm sunlight. I arranged the chairs and straightened the cushions, trying not to feel the subtle thrill of expecting Daniel again. When he arrived, he carried a small cloth bundle and his usual journal. His smile was easy, the kind that made me feel like I had known him far longer than a few afternoons. "Good morning, Eleanor," he said, his eyes scanning the garden as though memorizing it. "It's even more beautiful today. Thank you," I replied, feeling a warmth in my cheeks I quickly tried to hide. "I think the garden knows it's being appreciated." We began as usual with problems and notes spread across the table, but Daniel had a way of steering our sessions that felt more like genuine conversation than instruction. He asked questions that challenged me to think in new directions, and I found myself explaining concepts differently, exploring perspectives I hadn't considered before. Then he surprised me. "I was thinking," he said hesitantly, "that maybe we could try something different today, if that's all right with you." I raised an eyebrow, curious. Different how? "Maybe exploring the garden more," he suggested, drawing connections between what we're studying and what's around us. I thought it might help me understand the concepts better. There was something earnest in his voice that made it impossible to decline. I agreed, and we wandered slowly, letting the sunlight and shadows guide us. He pointed out the spiraling pattern of a snail's shell on the fence, noting how it related to the physics of motion. He observed the way water droplets clung to the lavender leaves, then connected it to surface tension concepts we'd been discussing. I was amazed at how naturally he made abstract principles tangible, using the garden itself as a bridge between theory and life. We paused near a stand of foxgloves. Their perfume hung heavy and sweet in the warm air. Daniel sat on the grass, journal on his knees, completely absorbed in sketching their delicate shape. I watched him quietly, noticing details I hadn't observed before. The slight furrow of his brow when concentrating, the way his lips curved into a subtle smile when something clicked into place. It was strangely intimate watching someone so focused, so alive in their learning. After a while, he looked up. "I brought something for you," he said, reaching into the cloth bundle. He pulled out a small tin and a bouquet of wildflowers he'd gathered along his walk. "Shortbread from my grandmother's recipe. I thought you might enjoy it with your tea." I felt a warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with the sunlight. "Daniel, that's so thoughtful." "Thank you." "It's nothing," he said, though I could tell from the way he avoided my gaze that he cared more than he let on. We continued our exploration, moving toward a corner of the garden, where I had been planning to create a small meditation space. Daniel knelt beside me, helping me place smooth stones in a circular pattern. We laughed when stones rolled away from their positions, when we couldn't quite get the spacing right. There was no pretense, just two people fully present in the moment. As the afternoon sun began its slow descent, I realized how much time had passed. We returned to the table, slightly dusty and tired, but grinning. Daniel brewed tea with quiet attentiveness, and I watched him move through the task with care, noticing again the thoughtfulness he invested in even the smallest gestures. "You know," he said, stirring his cup, "I didn't expect today to be like this either. It's more than just studying." I nodded, feeling a tightness in my throat. It always surprises me how much we can learn from each other, not just about academics, but about life itself. He smiled, and for a moment the air between us felt charged with something unspoken, a recognition of shared moments of trust, and of the beauty in unexpected companionship. There was no rush, no pressure, just a deep, quiet acknowledgement of connection. Before he left, he picked a few dried seed pods from a nearby plant and placed them in my palm. "For your garden," he said simply. "Little reminders of today." I laughed softly, touched. "I'll treasure them." As he walked down the path toward the gate, I lingered a moment, watching the way he moved, thoughtful, kind, genuinely present. I realized that these afternoons were teaching me more than I had expected. I wasn't merely guiding him academically. He was helping me see the world in fresh ways, notice beauty in unexpected corners, and appreciate the subtle, quiet joys that often pass unnoticed. That evening I stood in the garden, the sky turning soft lavender as the sun set. I reflected on the day and on the weeks we had spent together. Each visit had built upon the last, creating a rhythm of discovery, laughter, and mutual respect. Daniel had become more than a student. He was a reminder of what it feels like to truly connect with another person, to share space and thought and heart without pretense. And in that stillness, I understood something vital. Life has a way of surprising us when we allow ourselves to be open, attentive, and present. The lessons I was giving Daniel were being returned in ways I had never anticipated, shaping me, guiding me, and reminding me that growth isn't confined to textbooks. It exists in gestures, conversations, and the spaces we share with others. As the garden settled into evening calm, I felt a quiet contentment, a sense of gratitude for the unexpected joys that had filled these days. And I knew that whatever surprises the next session would bring, they would be met with openness, curiosity, and the kind of respect that makes connection genuinely meaningful. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment telling us where you're listening from, and share this with someone who might need a little reminder that unexpected connections can be the most transformative of all.